So it's 9 o'clock. We're going to go ahead and get started. We are trying to finish up the book of Revelation. We've been studying that for about the last 2 quarters. And so this morning we're going to try to get into Revelation chapter 21. Before we do that, though, I want to start in sort of an unlikely place. Turn in the Old Testament to the book of Ezekiel. As we've gone through the class, we've talked about how John is using a lot of apocalyptic language, Old Testament language, so that Christians in the first century who were very familiar with the Old Testament texts, if they were Jews, the Gentiles would have also been taught and studying those things. I could probably see a first century church with maybe a person who had formerly been a Jew who knew the Old Testament standing up and teaching about the Old Testament to some of the new Gentile Christians. And then, of course, they had the miraculous gifts, which was, I'd say, is pretty convenient. Sometimes I wish those were still around today whenever you're getting ready to teach a tough text. But you have the Old Testament prophet Ezekiel, which is one of the major prophets. And if you go to Ezekiel, go to Ezekiel chapter 36. I just want to skim over like a really 35,000-foot view of what happens at the end of Ezekiel, because I think you're going to see that in Revelation. I guess you would have seen it already. I've mentioned Ezekiel a few times as we've been studying through the last 4 chapters of Revelation. But if you go to Ezekiel chapter 36, I'll show you a little bit, and then you'll see what I mean as we go through the last 2 chapters. So in Ezekiel chapter 36, where is the nation of Israel at the time Ezekiel's writing? They're in Babylonian captivity, right? Ezekiel was a part of, I think, the second deportation, which would have been about 596 BC. And so he's by the river Kibar. Chapter 1 of Ezekiel talks about that. And so he's given this vision by God, okay? And so Revelation is a vision. Chapter 9 and verse 17 actually uses that exact language. He talks about this vision that he saw. And so here in Ezekiel chapter 36, at the end of the vision, God talks to Ezekiel about how Israel is going to be blessed, right? Chapter 30, they're going to come out of Babylon. They're going to go back to their lands. Okay, they're going to be delivered. Chapter 37 of Ezekiel is, if you remember the dry bones, he sees this valley of dry bones, and then flesh starts to come onto these dry bones, and they basically are resurrected, and that represents the people being delivered from Babylon and taken back to their land, right? And so then you have Ezekiel giving them some, basically, hey, when you go back to your land, the temple's going to be rebuilt. There's a lot of information. Well, look at chapter 38 of Ezekiel. There is this war between Israel, God's people, and Gog and Magog. Remember we looked at that in Revelation what? 20, yeah. Basically the last, 17. I don't expect you to know exactly what chapter. Remember, chapters were added by humans anyway. So if you ever get a chapter wrong, you can say, well, that wasn't in the original text, all right? So, but you have this battle of God's forces versus the evil forces of Gog and Magog, okay, which come from a reference to Ezekiel, okay? We talked about when we went through there. The lands it mentions seem to be some that Antiochus Epiphanes controlled during his time. So some people think maybe that's what it's a reference to before Jesus during the intertestamental period. Chapter 39 of Ezekiel, Gog's army is destroyed, okay? And then look at chapter 40. If you have subtitles over your little text, it may say a new city and a new temple, okay? And so basically the people are told, hey, when you come out of Babylon, you're going to go back to your land, your people are going to be resurrected, you're going to be given a new dwelling place, you're going to be given a new temple, okay? And then chapters 40 through about 46 give a lot of, instructions on this temple. In the notes, I have an article from Wayne Jackson that I think does a good job showing why what he believes and what I believe is that it's actually a figurative depiction of a temple that's representing the church. For instance, it talks about one section of the temple that's actually bigger than the entire city of Jerusalem. So it's kind of like, unless the numbers are off, how are you going to have a temple in the city of Jerusalem that's actually bigger than the entire city, okay? If you want more information on that, I've got the notes you can always get from me, and I've got some articles in there that you can read. All the way through chapter 47. Go to chapter 47. Ezekiel chapter 47. So when we get to Revelation chapter 22, we're going to be shown this vision of a city, and it's going to have one street running through the middle, and there's going to be a river there, okay? Look at Ezekiel chapter 47 and verse 1. Then he brought me back to the door of the temple, and there was water flowing from under the threshold of the temple, traveling towards the east. For the front of the temple faced east. The water was flowing from under the right side of the temple, south of the altar. He brought me out by way of the north gate and led me around on the outside of the outer gateway that faces east, and there was water running out on the right side. Now, I'm not going to read through the rest of this chapter, but if you want to read through it, it talks about how the water keeps getting deeper and deeper as he walks through it. And then jump all the way down to verse 12. Along the bank of the river, on this side and that, so on both sides of the bank of the river, Ezekiel 47:12, will grow all kinds of trees used for food. Their leaves will not wither, their fruit will not fail, they will bear fruit every month. And then at the end, their fruit will be for food, and their leaves for what? Medicine. Whenever you get healing, whenever you get to Revelation chapter 22, you're going to be given this same sort of vision of a road, but there's going to be on both sides, there's going to be a tree of life, the river, and these leaves are going to be the healing of the nations, right? So if you really want to go back and study Ezekiel, especially the last few chapters, let me know. I can give you some resources. But when you get to Revelation 21 and 22, you're going to be seeing John use a lot of things from Ezekiel, okay? So let's go to Revelation now. Go to Revelation chapter 21, and that's where we'll start. So a little bit of, summary. In chapters 17 and 18 of Revelation, we saw the beast fall, okay? We saw his power taken away, the false prophet, which would be, it's called Babylon, it's representing Rome. And then in chapter 19, we saw the two feasts, or the two suppers. We saw the marriage feast for the faithful. Those faithful people who've been persecuted but stayed faithful to God were rewarded with this feast. And the armies of the beast were basically, just like in Ezekiel 38 it is, they were basically slain in a field, and the birds came and ate their corpses, right? You see the same thing in Revelation 19 and Ezekiel 38. Okay, and then in chapter 20, Satan was finally dealt with. And Satan he was bound, and he was what? Cast into the bottomless pit, right? And he's locked up there in chapter 20. And then basically the wicked dead were sentenced to the second death, okay? Now in chapter 21, let's go ahead and start reading through this. We're going to see this vision of a new heavens and a new earth, a new Jerusalem, okay? And we're going to take a look at what the text is actually saying as we go through that, okay? It's going to be the dwelling place of the faithful, but then it's also kind of, you're going to see at one point, it's called the bride of the Lamb, which is the what? Church. So in a sense, remember, it's a vision, and just like in Ezekiel where he's given, the people of God are given this new temple, I think that's figuratively referencing the coming of the church. And then here in Revelation chapter 21 and 22, it sort of seems like this new city, the new Jerusalem, is the church, but it's also the dwelling place, okay? So remember, there's what type of language? Figurative. So don't try to make everything fit one-to-one. You say, wait a minute, it's a city, but it's also the bride of Christ. I don't understand, and we're going to look through some of those passages. It's been throughout the book, what type of language? Figurative. So don't go changing on us now, okay? We're not going to go figurative, and then we get to the end and say, oh, this is all literal, okay? So let's go ahead and start in verse 1. Now I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no more sea. In Revelation chapter 9 and verse 17, let's read that really quickly. We're just going to come right back. I mentioned it earlier, but I just want to show it to you. John is having a what? Revelation 9:17. What's it say? And thus I saw the horses in the vision. Okay, so it's a vision. So in the vision, he sees a new heaven and a new earth, and the first heaven and first earth had passed away, okay? What does the Bible say when it means a new heaven and a new earth? This has become a big thing in the last few years. I guess it's always been a big thing, but it keeps cropping up. The new heavens and new earth, that phrase is used 4 times in the Bible. It's in Isaiah 65, Isaiah 66, and in those contexts, it's talking about God is promising his people, you're in Babylon, you're going to be taken out of Babylon, and you're going to be given what? A new home, a new dwelling. And as humans, our dwelling is what? Earth, new heavens and new earth. Throughout the book of Isaiah, and I have a lot more in the notes, over and over, God promises to bring them out of Babylon and take them back to Israel, and his blessings is in new, new, new. So in my notes, I have things, Isaiah 42:9, new things, Isaiah 42:10, a new song, Isaiah 62:2, a new name, So when you get to Isaiah 65 and 66, a new heavens and a new earth, I don't think it's literal. I think he's doing what the prophets do. They make these promises of blessings in this new versus the old. The old's bad. The old is what happened when they were in Babylon, in captivity. The new is a new dwelling place. So you see that meaning in Isaiah 65 and 66. The only other time you see it is in 2 Peter chapter 3, and then here in Revelation chapter 21. I don't plan to spend an hour and a half giving you a dissertation on why I think this is figurative language. If you want more information, let me know. There are guys in the Brotherhood that teach this is saying there's going to be a literal new heavens and a literal new earth. The ones I've talked to, the Jehovah's Witnesses think that the earth is going to be laid bare, and then this earth is going to be like rejuvenated, right? You've heard rejuvenated earth or renovated earth. Even those guys in the Brotherhood that I've talked to that believe new heavens, new earth, they don't believe what the Jehovah's Witnesses believe. The Jehovah's Witnesses believe this earth is going to be laid bare and rebuilt. Those guys believe there's going to be a literal new heavens and a new earth. I don't hold that position, and I'm happy to talk to you why if you want to talk more about it. I think that it's taking figurative language and making it literal, which I just don't think you should do. I love those guys, but I just disagree with them on that. So I don't think this is talking about a literal new heavens and a new earth. I think it's talking about the figurative description of Christians' new dwelling place, which is going to be where? Heaven, right? That's what I think it's talking about. Okay. So, sir. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting you mention that because in Isaiah 65 and 66, it talks about the institution, the Sabbath or the Mosaic law, the worship. And so that's kind of one of those questions you have to deal with. Now, I've heard the way that they deal with it, and I understand where they're coming from, but they would say, well, some of this stuff was written to people coming out of Babylon, and that's why it talks about the sacrifices and that sort of thing. But I just feel like it's kind of hard to pick and choose which you want to take literally. That is the reason why a lot of premillennialists, when they go through and study Ezekiel, they think it's literal language talking about a literal time where God's going to rebuild a literal temple, and the Mosaic worship, the sacrifices are going to be reinstituted. That's how they get there, is they think it's all literal language, which we don't believe. We believe the book's been figurative, right? In Revelation has been figurative, and a lot of those prophets as well. And the way you can find that out is look and say, okay, like in Ezekiel, is this a literal new temple? I don't hold that it is because, like I said earlier, the size for the temple is bigger than the whole city of Jerusalem. So it's like, that sort of to me points to being a literal interpretation or a figurative interpretation, right? So that's a great point, Chris. These people who've been in Babylonian captivity have lived their whole life there. They've never actually worshiped at the temple. They've never brought sacrifices. And so he's talking to them about whenever you are delivered from Babylon, you're going to be taken home, and things in Jerusalem are going to be rebuilt. So that's a good point. If you want more information about the new heavens, new earth thing, I can give you lots of resources on that. Drew Leonard, who's a good buddy of mine, he wrote a whole book on it. It's called New Heavens, New Earth, in which he goes through and explains the reasons why he thinks that this text is obviously speaking figuratively and that there's not going to be a literal new heavens and a new earth, right? So other guys in the Brotherhood disagree, and I respect them, but I would agree with Drew. Okay, so let's go to verse 2. Then I, John, saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. Okay, so you have in this vision, he sees a new heavens and a new earth, and he sees coming down from heaven what? The holy city, new Jerusalem, okay, and is prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. Is it the church? We'll see in a few verses, all right? I'm not going to jump the gun too quickly. Okay, I have a whole lot more in the notes. I have all of the Old Testament references to Ezekiel, all the Old Testament references to Isaiah. There's a lot of them. If you really go back and find, there's a few places later in the notes that I'll actually show you some, where if you could put the text parallel, it's like verse for verse from like Isaiah, I think it's 60 and Revelation 21, okay? Verse 1? Yep. Yep. Yeah, you can, we could spend a whole lot longer than we have, and we've spent quite a bit of time on this book. You could probably spend, I could spend 15 minutes on each verse, just showing you the Old Testament references and the context. But, in this, we're trying to just get through as a whole picture, get through the book quickly. And then if you want to go back and do more in-depth study on your own, I can give you those resources as well. So the new city, the holy Jerusalem, the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven in his vision, adorned as a bride. Verse 3. I heard a loud voice from heaven saying, behold, the tabernacle of God is with men. He will dwell with them, and they shall be his people. God himself will be with them and be their God. Verse 4. And God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There shall be no more death, nor sorrow, nor crying. There shall be no more pain, for the former things have passed away. Remember what we talked about in Isaiah? You had the former things, which were captivity and idolatry, and those things were what? Bad. And you have all the new things in Isaiah, which are good. Okay? This is actually verse 4 of Revelation 21. I have in the notes Isaiah chapter 25 and verse 8. He will swallow up death forever. Okay, that's there shall be no more death. Isaiah 30 and verse 19. The people will dwell at Zion and Jerusalem. They will weep. They will cry no more. Isaiah 65, 19 and 20. There will be no more weeping. The voice of weeping nor crying will no longer be heard in her. And then it says, no more shall an infant from there live but a few days, nor an old man has fulfilled his days. Listen to this. For the child shall die 100 years old, and the sinner, being 100 years old, shall be accursed. There's not going to be sinners in heaven, right? This is obviously figurative language, okay? So that's, if you're trying to keep up, that's Isaiah 65, 19 and 20. All this is in the notes. So there's a sign-up list in the back. I know a lot of you are already on this, and each week we send out the notes so you can track all these Old Testament verses. Okay. So, verse 5. Then he who sat on the throne said, behold, I make all things what? New. And he said to me, write, for these words are true and faithful. He said to me, it is done. I am the Alpha, the Omega, the beginning and the end. I will give of the fountain of the water of life freely to him who thirsts. All right. So what is done? Well, Babylon, who's being referred to, it's Rome. Rome is what? Defeated. All the people they've persecuted are what? They're punished. Yeah, the people who've been persecuted have been basically vindicated by God. The people who are doing the persecution, whether it's the Roman citizens, whether it's those in the emperor cult, whether it's the emperor himself, or whether it's Satan, all the bad forces have been what at this point? They've been punished, right? They've been punished. They've been condemned to the second death. Satan has been bound. And so God has finally judged them, all right? Now, the principle throughout all time is any evil nation that would persecute Christians in the same way, what's going to happen to them? They're going to be destroyed. In the end, good triumphs over evil, and all of the bad forces are punished, okay? And those who are good, who have been faithful to God, will be delivered, okay? Look at verse 7. He who overcomes shall inherit all things. I will be his God. He shall be my son. This is really a constant theme in the Bible. Christians are already children of God. But, in the Old Testament, there was this language like in 2 Samuel 7, I think it is, where it talked about somebody who was already a member of Israel. When they became king, they became the son of God. They were in a new covenant with him, an agreement with him, right? So it's not saying basically that Christians weren't children of God before that. It's just Old Testament language of saying God has like renewed this relationship with them because they've been faithful to him, okay? In verse 7, it says they will inherit all things. If you remember in Revelation chapter 2 and verse 7, these are some of the promises that were made to those churches who were facing persecution. Revelation 2:7, he who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. To him who overcomes, that's what verse 7 says of chapter 21, and verse 7 of chapter 2 says the same thing. To him who overcomes, I will give to eat from the tree of life. You'll see that a little bit later in chapter 22, which is in the midst of the paradise of God. Okay, it's sort of a reference back to Eden. Okay, if you overcome, God's going to not literally let you eat of the tree of life in the Garden of Eden, but he's going to bless you, okay? And you're going to ultimately end up in heaven, okay? Revelation chapter 2 and verse 11 talked about those who overcame or overcomes. He who overcomes will not be hurt by the second death, okay? This is all those promises in chapters 2 and 3 to the churches. If you're faithful, you're going to end up where, ultimately? Heaven. That's right, okay? So this is, a figurative depiction of the church, but also the church is going to be in heaven with God. And so as you go through, we'll see that it's figurative. It's not a literal description. Verse 8, the cowardly, the unbelieving, the abominable, murderers, sexually immoral, sorcerers, idolaters, and all liars shall have their part in the lake which burns with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. All right, that's, I think, fairly self-explanatory, okay? Look at verse 9. Then one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls filled with the 7 last plagues came to me and talked with me and said, Come, I will show you the bride, the what? The Lamb's wife. Okay, what do you know from Scripture? Who's the bride of Christ? The church is, okay? So he says to John, Come, I'm going to show you the what? The church, right? But a lot of times you hear it described as Revelation 21 and 22 as a figurative description of where? Heaven, okay? But let's go to Hebrews chapter 12. These are some of the reasons you know it's all figurative language, okay? Hebrews chapter 12, and let's go to verse 22. Hebrews 12:22. Okay, this is written to the church, okay? The Hebrews who are being persecuted and thinking about leaving Christianity, leaving the church and going back to Judaism. And the Hebrews writer says, But you have come to where? Mount Zion. What's Mount Zion another name for in the Old Testament? Yeah, Jerusalem. Okay, so he says, You've come to Mount Zion, you've come to Jerusalem, to the city of the living God, the heavenly what? The heavenly Jerusalem, to an innumerable company of angels, to the general assembly and church of the firstborn. Who's the firstborn from the dead? Yep, starts with Jesus, right? Who are registered where? In heaven. So here you have basically saying Mount Zion, the Jerusalem, the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, the general assembly and church of the firstborn, okay? So when you see this vision of Revelation 21 and 22, it's like a figurative depiction of heaven, but it's also called the what? Church. I think it's just basically saying the glorified church is going to be beautiful. It's kind of like Ezekiel's temple. Ezekiel's temple is, I don't think, talking about a literal temple, but figurative of the church. That's where I think, okay? So look at verse 10. He carried me away in the Spirit to a great and high mountain and showed me the great city, the holy Jerusalem, descending out of heaven from God, right? So this is in a vision, remember? And who is this great city? Well, verse 9 said it was the Lamb's wife, the bride. I don't think Jesus is going to be married to a city. I think he's going to be married to the church, right? That's what the rest of the text says, okay? So, look at verse 11. Having the glory of God, her light was like a most precious stone, like a jasper stone, clear as crystal. This is in the notes where I have lots of references to Ezekiel, etc. I'm not going to read those. Verse 12. She had a great high wall with 12 gates and 12 angels at the gates and names written on them, which are the names of the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. 3 gates on the east, 3 gates on the north, 3 gates on the south, 3 gates on the west. In Ezekiel, when you have that temple depicted, it talks about a wall, and it says that there's going to be, guess what? It's going to be 12 gates, 12 walls, 12 gates, and they're going to have the names of the children of Israel on those walls, okay, on the gates. What do you think it means 12 angels at the gates? What does an angel do at times in the Old Testament? What did the angel do at the Garden of Eden? You want to say the gates of the garden? He did what? He's a guard, right? So in this depiction, whether you want to say it's the heavenly city or it's the church, it's got these 12 gates, and at each gate there's a what? A guard, right? It's protection, okay? It's going to protect the people. And it's got a name of the children of Israel on each gate, okay? Well, I don't know that it actually have to get protected from anything literally. I think it's just the idea of protection, yeah. I take this as being a figurative vision, right? So it's like the church is protected by God. And if you were, you say, why does it need protection in heaven? Well, if you're a first century Christian, the fear that you have is the persecution from Rome, right? So I don't think God needs, in essence, does God really need any angels to help him protect anything? No. God by himself could say, well, I could just do it all myself, right? If there was someone that actually brought a threat against his people, God could just wipe them out. I think it's just figurative language to say God's going to protect.
They knew the history of how God had used angels in the past to destroy
Yeah.
their enemies.
Yeah. Yeah.
This was just common, something that they could relate to.
Sure. Yeah, if you're Israel, one of the most famous, if not the most famous story of your whole history is the Exodus. where Pharaoh did not listen to God and was persecuting his people. So God gives him a chance and finally says, okay, I'm sending a destroying angel. He's going to kill all the firstborn. Including, if you look at Egyptian history, the Pharaoh had a firstborn son. Obviously, the Bible says that. But that actually, there's some Egyptian history in there as well that I don't know, it's interesting. I'll try not to launch off into it. But it's pretty cool, the Egyptian history of it, because you can see the Pharaoh of the Exodus, you can see the next Pharaoh that takes over is actually, it's like his I think it's his stepson or something like that. So there's like historical proof to show that the Pharaoh of the time of the Exodus, firstborn son, actually did die, right? I think what it was is the son that took over was like really ill-prepared. And so people are like, well, why would this Pharaoh take over? Well, because they hadn't been grooming him, because he wasn't the firstborn. They've been grooming the firstborn, and he still died, right? So anyway. Verse 14, the wall of the city had 12 foundations. All right, where's Con at? Con, when you build a building, how many foundations are you going to put under it? One normally, right? You know, if I was hiring a contractor to build a house for me and he said, okay, this is the first foundation, we got 11 to go, I'd say, I don't think I can afford this house, right? It's figurative language, right? What's the word 12 been representative of throughout the book? Yeah, I always say organized religion, right? But you can say it however you want. In the Old Testament, there was 12 tribes. In the New Testament, there was 12 apostles, and one died, and one replaced him, and then Paul came along. So actually, there was 14 altogether, okay? But the 12 is what the Bible calls the apostles, okay? So 12 sort of is like this number for, you know, I don't want to say leadership or organized religion or whatever you want to call it. But you see that throughout the book, the number 12, the number 144, etc., right? So the city had 12 foundations, and on them were the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. So you have the 12 apostles as the foundations, and then on the gates of the city you have the 12 tribes of Israel. I think it's just like the 144,000 referenced in chapter 7. It's just saying all of God's people, right? So if you understand this to be the bride, the Lamb's bride, the church, it makes sense. The church is built on what? The foundation, Ephesians maybe 2:20, of the apostles and the prophets, right? Okay. Okay, verse 15. And he who talked with me had a golden reed to measure the city, its gates, and its walls. Ezekiel 40, verses 1 through 5, talks just like this. There's someone that's going to measure the city for the rebuilding of this temple, okay? And if you remember in Revelation 11:1, there was a command, rise and measure the temple of God, the altar, and those who worship him. And that was for protection. Remember, it was measure these people to protect them, okay? So, is that what it's saying here? Hey, there's somebody that's going to once again give another measure of protection? I mean, it could be. Look at verse 16. The city is laid out as a square. Its length is as great as its breadth. And he measured the city with the reed, 12,000 furlongs. Its length, breadth, and height are equal. What's it mean its length, breadth, and height are equal? What shape is that? That's a cube, right? So this heavenly city is 1,500 miles or like 1,400 miles, depending on your measurements, in a giant cube, right? Like that'd be enormous, okay? So what is other people's translations? I have the New King James, says 12,000 furlongs. Does anybody else's translation have something different? Stadia? Anyone have it in miles? I think that some translations say 1,500 miles. I think the focus is on 12,000. That's what I guess you'd say the original text said. What significance does that number have? 12 and 1,000. 1,000 means completeness. 12 is this number that you've had for the foundation of the apostles, and the tribes have been the gates. I think it's just figurative language. I don't think this is saying heaven is going to literally be 1,500 miles cubed in all directions. I don't even know if I have my notes. I have it in a note somewhere. It's not in here. I'll try to find it. I have somebody that actually basically measured it into apartments and did how many apartments it would be. It was like some billion number of apartments if you had like a 9-foot high ceiling, like a regular apartment building, but 1,500 miles high, all right? Would that even fit on Earth? Not this one, right? 1,500 miles. I mean, how many miles is it into space? Does anybody know that? I don't know. It's not 1,500, I can tell you that, okay? So this enormous figurative language is talking about this city, okay? And it's like a cube. Ironically, in the Old Testament, you remember what the Holy of Holies in the temple was? It was a cube. Yeah, it was a cube. And Joe, in Hebrews, what's What's the Holy of Holies on earth represent? Yeah, the church. And yeah, heaven, the heavenly, you've got, is it chapter 9? I don't remember. Yeah, but you can go find it for yourself, right? Okay, Revelation 21:17. Then he measured its wall 100 and what? 44 cubits. What's 144? 12 times 12. Okay, literal? I think it's just figurative language, okay? According to the measure of a man, that is of an angel, okay? I don't really know what that means. Measure of a man, that is an angel. Angel just means messenger, okay? So I don't really know what to take of that part. Verse 18, the construction of its wall was of jasper. The city was what? Pure gold like clear glass. I'm not a gold expert. I don't have much of it. I wish I could say that I did, but I've never seen gold that's pure as glass, right? I think it's, what kind of language? Figurative. I'm not trying to beat that into you, right? But I guess I probably am. So then look at verse 19. The foundations of the wall of the city were adorned with all kinds of precious stones. The first foundation, I'm reading from the New King James. Different translations have different names for these stones. But the New King James, I have, the first foundation was jasper, the second sapphire, the third chalcedony, the fourth emerald, the fifth sardonyx, the sixth sardius, the seventh chrysolite, the eighth beryl, the ninth topaz, the 10th chrysoprase, the 11th jacinth, and the 12th amethyst. All right, so the foundations of the wall were adorned with all these precious stones. All right, so they're adorned with precious stones. What was the foundation earlier? The wall of the city had 12 foundations. On them were the names of the 12 apostles. So you have 12 foundations with the names of the apostles and all these pretty stones, okay? I think it's figurative, okay? I have a lot of notes on this. In Isaiah chapter 54, verses 11 through 13, it spoke of God building their foundation with all these colorful gems, and I have them listed there. They're very similar. A lot of these stones are ones that were on the high priest's breastplate, right? Yes? Mm-hmm.
Could that be just these measurements are just by man's standards, but that's not how it's really going to be?
I mean, maybe. I've always heard a cubit is, you have this 18-inch cubit, and then you have a royal cubit, which I think was like 10 feet, I think maybe. I think I saw that at the Ark Encounter. I've never heard that before. But according to the measure of a man, that is of an angel. Well, I mean, a man's not an angel. I mean, a man is a messenger, if that's what you want to take. But if this is like a created angelic being, a man's not that. So, I don't know. I'm sure if you read the commentaries, they'll have it all figured out. That's a joke if you ever read commentaries. In Exodus, I have Ezekiel. I think I have Exodus. That's wrong, though. Let me change it in my notes. Should be Ezekiel chapter 28 and verse 17. You have the stones of the high priest's breastplate that are described. No, that is Exodus. What am I changing that for? I should just trust myself, right? Exodus 28:17 is where the high priest's breastplate is described. And then Ezekiel 28, there's a description of the king of Tyre. And there's this reference to him thinking he's holy, and it actually references what some people think could possibly be a figurative description of what the devil was like before he fell. It talks about an anointed cherub who was beautiful and then fell. So some people think maybe that's a reference to Satan before the fall. Either way, you can go read all these notes. I actually have a description, too, from a jewelry store. You might be interested to know that this list of stones is where each month is where gemstones came from. Josephus talks a lot about it. It later developed into, of course, they actually were called foundation stones, like maybe in the 1500s or something. I have it in the notes. But this is the idea where these foundation stones or birthstones came from. And so eventually they sort of lost their religious significance. Like people today don't think that they're holding up something religious with a birthstone, but at least the origin of the stones came from this. I have a whole lot of notes in there you can read about that. Look at Revelation 21:21. The 12 gates were what? 12 pearls. Figurative or literal, do you think? That'd be a big pearl, yeah. I have a whole bunch of notes in here talking about this. It says the 12 gates were 12 pearls. Each gate was one pearl, and the street singular of the city was what? Pure gold. So you have a 1,500-mile city up this way, cube, and it's got how many streets? One street. Now, what does that mean? Obviously, I think it's figurative. There could be an illusion here. you always, whenever you see somebody reference something, I always try to find primary sources, right? So some people in commentaries will say, well, then Smyrna, there was this street called the Street of Gold. And I don't like to just trust a commentary, right? I want to say, okay, where did you get that from? Did you make it up? Or is there like some historical document you can point to? And I haven't been able to locate this one yet. But let me read you this one quote that I found in a book about Revelation, the 7 cities. He said, the city of Smyrna, which is one of the cities earlier in the chapters 2 and 3, was called the crown city or the crown of Asia. There were temples dedicated to Zeus, Sibyl, Asclepius, Apollo, Aphrodite, and others. In fact, there was a street paved with gold that ran from the temple of Zeus to the temple of Diana for easy access to both. Caesar worship was popular as the city was immensely loyal to Rome. Even with all this, the Jews had a synagogue there as well, the church in Smyrna established between 53 and 56. And I have another longer quote that I won't read. But some commentators think this is a reference to, hey, in this city that had all these temples to false gods, there was this street of gold, right? Now look at the very next verse. Verse 22, but I saw what? No temple in it, for the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb are its temple. So some people think that these two verses, this reference to the street of gold was, hey, in Smyrna there was a street of gold that was literal, that was surrounded by all these false gods and false temple worship. But in heaven there's going to be a street of gold that's clear as crystal, and there's going to be no temple because God's going to be there, right? So, I mean, I don't know if that's right or not. That's one possible take on it. But I think you can see this as figurative, or else I don't know how you'd have each gate was one pearl. I mean, does it open? Does it split down the middle? Does it have hinges on the side? I've seen circular pearls. You have to one hinge on the... I mean, I just think it's figurative language, okay? There's some more notes I have, too. Pearls are classified as a gemstone. And in the 1st century BC, Julius Caesar passed a law that only the ruling classes could wear pearls. So, yeah, I think they even said in one resource, Cleopatra was said to crush a pearl into a glass of her wine to show Mark Antony of Rome that she could throw the most expensive dinner party in history. So, good for her, I guess. Verse 23, the city had no need of sun or of the moon to shine in it, for the glory of who illuminated it? God. The Lamb is its light. Isaiah 60 uses exactly that same sort of language too. Verse 24, and the nations of those who are saved shall walk in its light, and the kings of the earth shall bring their glory and honor into it. Verse 25, its gates shall not be shut at all by day, there shall be no night there. They shall bring the glory and honor of the nations into it. Verse 27, but there shall by no means enter into it anything that defiles or causes an abomination or a lie, but only those who are written in the Lamb's book of life. Those last 3 verses, 25, 26, and 27, are almost like verbatim from Isaiah 60:11, 60:12, and then 60:21, right? What do I think that means? I think John is using language just like the prophets did to say, ultimately, if you're evil, God's going to what? Destroy you and punish you. If you're righteous, God's going to what? Vindicate you and save you. It was the same message to the people coming out of Babylon as to the 1st century church, right? They were in a little bit different circumstances, but the overall message is the same. We will tackle Revelation chapter 22 next week, and we'll finish out the book. If you want the notes, there's a sign-up sheet in the back. If you have questions, feel free to email me about them. There's a lot of things in here that I wish I had the time to dive into way more deeply, but then I also fear that that would sort of take away from like the overall thrust of the book. It's like hard to go deep into one verse and also move fairly fast, So, yeah, thanks for your attention. If you have any questions, let me know, and there's a sign-up sheet in the back that you can sign up on. I'll send you all the notes from the introduction all the way up through chapter 21. Next week, after we do chapter 22, I'll send you my chapter 22 notes. So, thanks for your attention.